Next, from Chicago, Governor Rauner is joined by the director of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services as the two discuss transformations taking place within the department. This runs about 30 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. This morning we'd like to talk about one of the most important efforts underway to transform Illinois government, and that is in our Department of Children and Family Services. I think you all are tragically aware of the shambles that DCFS was in when our administration came in to the governorship. The Department of Children and Family Services was under multiple investigations. Morale was devastated among the staff, and there were serious questions about whether the department could even function and to protect the most vulnerable young people in Illinois. We're very fortunate that Director George Sheldon agreed to join our administration fairly early on in our efforts. He's got an incredible track record at providing family services in multiple structures and administrations, extremely talented, and he's leading a transformation of the department. The staff is energized, highly motivated, with a new dedication to purpose, and Director Sheldon has streamlined operations, eliminated a lot of paperwork and bureaucratic ineffectiveness, and allowed our caseworkers, our social workers, to really focus on the children and the families, not on paperwork and bureaucracy. And the transformation has been stunning. The effectiveness has risen dramatically, and there's a renewed sense of energy and vigor in the department. And I give Director Sheldon huge credit for that. One of the initiatives that he's undertaken in conjunction with Hardik Bhatt and others in our administration is making sure that the information about our children and their families is integrated so we can provide services across the spectrum quickly and effectively, and days and weeks are not lost when a young person becomes subject to our supervision or our help in the government. Time matters when we're dealing with vulnerable children and their families. Every day matters. In some cases, hours matter. We need information at our fingertips so our social workers and caseworkers can help our children who are vulnerable and in many cases in distress. And we've got a new system, a 360 initiative underway to integrate all data, all information comprehensively about our families and our young people who are under the protection of our government agencies. We also have several pieces of bipartisan legislation, largely supported and driven by Director Sheldon, changing the nature of foster parenting in the state of Illinois, making it much more effective going forward for fictive kin and normalcy parenting, and Director Sheldon will address that with you here this morning as well. And with that, I'd like to turn over the microphone to Director Sheldon to talk a bit more about the initiatives that he's undertaken. Director Sheldon.
Governor, thank you. Governor, thank you, and I appreciate those kind words. When I first came to Illinois, I recognized that there was a significant amount of reform that needed to be done here. The Chicago Tribune had done their harsh treatment series, really highlighting some of the issues that were going on in our residential facilities. A lot of concern. I also looked at the fact that there had been a revolving door of directors. I think I'm the seventh in the last 5 years, which has led to a significant amount of silos occurring within the agency, some 16 deputies. The other thing about Illinois is I discovered Illinois has the longest length of stay in foster care of any state in the country. And just to put that in perspective, the average length of stay here is 33 months. We've been able to get it down to 7 months in Florida. Now, it's inched back up to about 11 or 12 months in my home state. But on its best day, the state is not a good parent. So the quicker we can reunify families, or the quicker we can move children to an appropriate alternative setting, preferably an adoptive or kinship guardianship, the better off I think we are. We have made progress in the department, but I will be the first to say we still have a long way to go. We have been able to move about 300 young people out of residential facilities to more of a community placement, sometimes home and relative, children who no longer need to be in that kind of intensive care. Let me point out also, and this is something I think the Tribune story really identified, is that residential care is meant to be a therapeutic intervention. It is not designed to be a long-term placement. And that's occurred here in this state. So by moving 300 young people out of residential to a community setting, that has given us the ability to cut in half the number of young people waiting for transfer of the department from detention. It's also, we are at the point where we've reduced the number of children who are in shelter care, emergency shelter care. We've cut that in half. Those are all significant. But I'm not satisfied yet with everything that needs to be done has yet been done. The other thing I found, Governor, really was the positive side. This is probably the most experienced staff of any state in the country. And I think that there is a passionate commitment to children on the part of the state employees within the agency. But I also have found a really cooperative private sector who really wants to work together to make improvements. So over the course of the last several months, not only have we reduced children in residential care, reduced children in shelter care, reduced children awaiting transfer from detention, we've also created additional capacity. So we just rolled out 3 pilots in Rockford, Aurora, and Cook County for true therapeutic community placement. And then the other aside I would point out, residential care is the most expensive, about $120,000 a child, where you can do a much better job in the community with real therapeutic wraparound services for half that. So not only is it better for kids, it's more cost effective, to the point that we are the lowest number of children in residential care probably in the last 7 years in Illinois. That's a significant improvement. But it also really is a different way of thinking of things. I think the governor pointed out how important time is to children. You ask a child, how long is it from Thanksgiving to Christmas? They'll say forever. And for us old guys, time passes much quicker, but for children, it is slow. So we need to act with a sense of urgency for children. And that, I have kind of a 2-cent solution, common sense and a sense of urgency. That's the way we need to be empowering our staff to act. And what I've said to our staff is, first of all, figure out what the right thing to do is for an individual child, and then figure out how the rules apply to it. So we've created kind of a new way of thinking, and the 2 pieces of legislation that the governor discussed, one is normalcy. I asked a bunch of foster kids in a former role of mine, about 50, if you were in my position, you could do anything to change the system, what would you do? And they came up with a number of ideas, but this one little 11-year-old boy, I think, put it best when he said, just stop calling us foster kids. We're just kids. So one of the pieces of legislation is normalcy, to really empower foster parents to be parents. If Sally wants to do a sleepover down the street with her best friend, do we really have to do a home study and a background check? First of all, she doesn't want to admit she's in foster care to start with. So why don't we allow foster parents to do what a prudent parent would do? Get down and meet the other parents. Is it a safe place? Is it an environment that you would want your own child? We may not want foster children skydiving, but we probably don't want our own child skydiving. So allow foster parents to make prudent decisions on a prudent parent model. Secondly, we're expanding the definition of fictive kin. Fictive kin is basically someone who is not related to the child but has a deep relationship with that child. That could be a next-door neighbor. But the expansion of fictive kin definition would also mean that a foster parent could all of a sudden be considered a fictive kin of that child if in fact a relationship had developed. Lastly, let me just point out how important technology is to this. And I think the governor, working with Hardik, has done some very innovative things to begin to integrate databases. So now, with the 360 view, which we'll be rolling out this summer, you enter the name of the child in the database. And by searching other databases, it automatically comes up with known relationships, uncles, aunts, and it will provide the caseworker with information about those relationships, TANF information, SNAP information, Medicaid information. And then later we will be adding other databases like sexual offender information, like child support information. So it allows caseworkers to do which they're trained to do, which is casework, instead of paperwork. And finally, we've just rolled out a pilot in Mount Vernon to utilize mobile technology. Right now, a caseworker or protective investigator makes a visit. They enter their notes in longhand and then go back to the office and re-enter them. With the mobile technology, workers will be equipped with an iPhone, a Droid, an iPad, a laptop. So when they make the visit, they take a picture of the child every time, so at least you have an updated picture every 30 days. It will have a GPS date and time stamp, so you know the visit happened, you know where it happened. And then the visitation notes will be entered on the device. That will be automatically uploaded. Caseworkers spend on average 20 to 40% of their time on paperwork. And by eliminating that step, we will be freeing up a number of individuals to do that which they're trained to do, which is casework, doing what's right for children. So while we've made some progress, Governor, I think we still have a long way to go. We're changing our monitoring in response to the Chicago Tribune series, but also it's the right thing to do. So we have reached out. We have the University of Illinois at Chicago and Northwestern University who will be doing external monitoring to supplement what we're doing until such time as we can build an internal capacity. So I think we're making some progress, and I appreciate the governor's support, which has been extensive over the period of the last year to allow us to do that which we do well. Thank you.
Great. Yes.
Sheldon, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I was stunned when you said that Illinois still has the longest stay, 33 months. Why is that?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure I can pinpoint it in one item, but part of that is we've got to start improving our credibility with the court system because the courts dramatically control that length of stay. I've reached out both with some members of the Supreme Court to the Illinois Office of the Courts. We're looking at working with the Office of the Courts to do a summer summit with judges, with state attorneys, because we've got to get that message across that the extent to which we can return children safely, that's what we ought to do. And let me just, on that point, we know how to keep kids safe. That's the easy part. You bring them into care, you lock them in a room, give them 3 hot meals, they're safe. But the question is, what are those children going to become when they age out? So that's why child well-being is critical to this. That's why normalcy is critical to this. So I think part of this is changing the culture within the agency and recognizing that community-based care, relative care, care with a biological parent is better for the child.
The 2 pieces of legislation have been filed?
They have, and normalcy passed out of committee in the Senate this past week unanimously. I think that was significant. And the other, and on both of those pieces of legislation, we've engaged with foster kids and foster alumni, because we really designed a whole child welfare system in this country, and we never talked to kids. And who understands the system better than kids themselves? So on these legislation, we've reached out to them. They've been very supportive, and I think will continue to be.
The use of digital recording of notes by each caseworker, do you have an estimate as to what that saves in terms of person hours? And will it be reflected in a lower caseload, fewer employees? What impact will it have?
Well, I can't give you an exact. I would estimate really about 20%. But that's an estimate, that's a subjective estimate. In my view, that's to free up workers to do that which they ought to do. I do not think that means a reduction in workforce because our caseloads have inched up. They're entirely too high. Part of that is working with CMS to get the grading process down. We've just hired 38 new protective investigators here in Cook County, so that will help us dramatically. I think the mobile devices will. The pilot is happening in Mount Vernon. We'll be opening a branch of that pilot here in Cook. This is not, use of technology is not new to child welfare. As a matter of fact, this whole mobile concept we rolled out in Florida, and we've got to use it more aggressively. And now it's virtually throughout the state, in my home state.
How has the lack of a 2016 budget impacted your agency?
Well, I'm not a big fan of consent decrees, but we are governed by a consent decree, so we've been paying everything. So all of our vendors have been paid, and I think that's important.
At the 2015 budget rate?
Yes.
Governor Rauner, so you've been up now with the election over, and it looks like Donald Trump is the nominee.
Could I ask a favor? Let's focus on this important issues of DCFS, and when we're all done with that, then I'd love to talk about some of those issues.
Mr. Sheldon? So you're, to follow up, the vendors are being paid at 2015 rates, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And what are you telling vendors as they try to plan their next year as the budget impasse continues?
Well, I mean, first of all, the budget is above my pay grade, but I've tried to develop some confidence on the part of our. Ultimately, there will be a budget. I'm confident of that, and I think our vendors really have to hold on for that. Now, are some of them struggling? Of course, because a lot of our vendors also have contracts with the Department of Human Services and with other agencies who do not have a kind of consent decree that we have. The other point that I've tried to make to our vendors is if you are having cash flow issues as a result of that, let us know, and we'll work with the Comptroller's Office, who has been very willing to work with us to help those agencies who are going through this extremely tough time. So, you know, I am hopeful that the General Assembly will ultimately reach out to what I think the governor has extended a hand to say, let's compromise on this. Let's come to some middle ground. But this is Illinois, and I've only been here a year. So,
How far behind was Illinois in terms of making these changes? Was the best practice for other state agencies, for other states that had similar departments, did they make that change in technology that you've discussed today perhaps 4 or 5 years ago?
Florida made that change about 5 years ago, and it is rapidly moving into other states. On the interstate compact, on the transfer of children, other states are now doing that electronically instead of with paper. When you have a child and you find a willing relative in another state. So a lot is going on nationally to do that. And now, but let me also point out on a lot of areas, because we know more about child welfare now than we did a decade ago. We know that 85% of brain development happens in the first 5 years of life. We know now the impact of adverse childhood experiences on the life of a child. We know now the impacts of trauma. A decade ago, that was new. So the whole concept of trauma-informed care, Illinois embraced. So I think on some of these things, Illinois is not that far behind. I think where Illinois has to improve is both in the technology area and in the length of stay of children in care for as long as it is.
All right, I'm sorry, your question?
If Donald Trump is the nominee, will you support him?
I will support the Republican Party's nominee for president. I'll do everything I can to work with that nominee.
Even if it's Trump?
I will support the Republican Party's nominee.
But why would you vote for Trump if he does get the nomination?
I'm sorry?
Why would you support Trump if he does get the nomination?
I'm the leader of the Republican Party in Illinois.
Do you have any doubts as to his qualifications to be president?
I am not going to comment in detail about candidates. As I've said all from the beginning, I think we should respect the voters' decisions. The process is still in midstream. We should let the process play out, and I'm not going to comment on specific candidates.
Governor, there have been 4 expressway shootings just since Friday in areas all patrolled by the Illinois State Police. Does it appear that the state police have lost control of the expressway system, and that's why the shootings just seem to continue and continue?
I do not believe that the Illinois State Police have lost control of our highway system at all. I do believe we have a tragic level of violence throughout Chicagoland, but also in other parts of the state. That's true for various reasons. Our young people do not see a future for themselves in Illinois, in many of our communities, in many of our neighborhoods, and they are turning to gangs as part of their own answer for themselves to have an economic future. I think if we helped restore the functioning of family structure in Illinois, as Director Sheldon is attempting to do, I believe if we put more money in our schools, especially in our lower income schools, and helped support the quality improvement in education for our young people, and I believe if we did more to expand our economy, grow more jobs in every community, especially in our struggling communities, I think more of our young people would see a future for themselves and not to resort to this gang violence that's has become a rapid epidemic.
Now, a quick follow-up.
Okay, just quick. Okay.
The issue of gun violence in the city is not new. In fact, we're actually at lower levels than we were in the 80s.
Yes.
What is unique and new is this pattern of expressway shootings that has really cropped up in the last 12 to 18 months. What do you think is driving that if it's not an issue of patrol by the state police? They don't fear it. There's no sense to them to not conduct shootings.
There are waves and cycles of violence in certain areas, in certain circumstances, in certain neighborhoods that ebb and flow. I don't have all the answers to that. I believe our state police are doing a terrific job from everything that I can see. Obviously, we're reviewing the patterns of violence, discussing what issues, what should we do to different, what might we change. We're certainly going to assess the situation on a continuing basis.
Can you provide any update on what the state's doing to help CPS with its financial difficulties? I know it's provided the documents that is being requested.
Yes.
How soon do you anticipate them declaring or not declaring financial difficulties? It's been 2 months since the Republican leaders have called for state intervention.
Yes. Obviously, I continue to be extremely concerned about the financial condition of Chicago Public Schools. I'm extremely concerned. The State Board of Education is following the law and the process to do their own analysis of the financial condition of the Chicago Public Schools. I'm not sure of the exact time frame for their final report and their result. I think it's fairly soon, but I don't have a date for you. As I've said, I think it's critical that we have Chicago Public Schools managed in a way that teachers don't lose their jobs. We can't afford to lose teachers. We need every teacher in Chicago Public Schools that we can have. I'd like to see the overall quality improved over time, but that's a separate issue. Teachers should not be losing their jobs over a financial difficulty of CPS. And as I've said in the past, I believe that one of the options that should be explored for Chicago Public Schools is reorganizing their debts and their contracts under court supervision. I've said that that is an option that should be on the table to be evaluated because that may be one of the best ways to allow teachers to keep their positions. If we don't have that option on the table, I'm concerned that the only other option is massive tax hikes in the city of Chicago on homeowners and small business owners. And I'm talking about massive tax hikes. That would be tragic on multiple levels. Struggling families, working families in Chicago are already hurting. Many are leaving because they don't see a good future in the city for various reasons. And I think that the option of reorganizing debts and contracts under court supervision should be on the table, and I've advocated that for a while.
Last question. There are some rumors that the budget impasse will continue until this November. So in terms of higher education, what is the message you want to send to faculty and specifically for the students that are worried about it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So now that the primaries are over, I'm hoping that the legislature will focus on getting some compromises and getting a budget. I've been told by leaders in the General Assembly on the other side of the aisle that things should be held in abeyance until after the primaries. I've asked the General Assembly to come back now that the primaries are done and get to work to solving our problems and get a budget and get some compromises. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to stay on vacation until April 4th. I'm more than a little frustrated about that. My office did reach out to Speaker Madigan's office last week and say, the primaries are over. How about if you and I get together this week and talk about a budget and some compromises? No commitments came back, no position on when those discussions might take place. My understanding is the Speaker is in town, which is good, so maybe he and I could meet. I think that'd be productive. I would remind everybody, I've heard some questions in others outside of this venue that, gee, should I be calling 4-leader meetings to try to push things along? 4-leader meetings in the past have never really worked, and when I called them last summer and in the fall, there was strong resistance from the other side of the aisle to having them. I think there's a reluctance for whatever reason, and the reality is I don't think the Speaker will be, his style is not to be compromising in a group. I don't see, that's not how he works. So I don't think, my own view is further 4-leader meetings probably will not be productive. I'm hoping that the Speaker and I can meet in private soon. I'd like today maybe, but whatever. I'll remind you all of 2 things. First, there are real solutions to some of our immediate problems. There's a real solution on MAP grant funding. And we should be funding our MAP grants for our low-income kids. And if we did procurement reform, that would free up the money, more than enough money, to fund our MAP grants. We could do that. That's bipartisan. Even the other side of the aisle has agreed we need procurement reform, most of them. So let's do that right now. MAP grants could be funded. Our university system could be funded for hundreds of millions of dollars if we took some excess funds out of special purpose funds and put them into university funding. That bill has already been sponsored on a bipartisan basis. We could fund our universities so Chicago State would not have to close and Eastern Illinois would not have to lay off staff or faculty. There's a real solution, bipartisan. So far, the Speaker has not been willing to call the university funding bill along with some special purpose funds reallocation. I'll also say I'm very troubled by the lack of social service funding. Human services, for example, Catholic Charities does incredibly good work helping the most vulnerable in our community. They are going out on a limb financially. Catholic Charities is struggling. If we did pension reform, as an example, our pension reform could save billions. Even President Cullerton's pension reform could save $1 billion a year. That could go a long way towards funding our human services during this time. And I've said I will sign whatever language President Cullerton puts forward on his proposal. I've said I'll support it. So far, nothing. And in the meantime, Catholic Charities and our most vulnerable families are being hurt. To say that I'm frustrated would be to put it mildly. It's wrong. People in Illinois are being hurt by this impasse, and there are bipartisan solutions. It seems to me that the crisis is being extended for political gain and messaging, and that's wrong. And then the final point I'll make on this, because there's nothing important for, I think, everyone here to understand. The solutions that we're proposing, the reforms that we're advocating, are bipartisan. These are not partisan solutions that we're advocating. Every significant reform that we've recommended is supported by the majority of the people of Illinois, and most of them are supported by a significant majority of the Democrats, registered Democratic voters in Illinois. So this is not a partisan, radical, extreme agenda. The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans support term limits, as an example, to restore good, more responsive government. Why can't we vote on that? The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans support redistricting reform so we can have competitive general elections. Why can't we vote on that? Why can't we have those reforms restore the confidence of the business community in government in Illinois so they create more jobs and make more investments so we can have rising family incomes? The vast majority of the voters in Illinois, Democrats and Republicans, support comprehensive pension reform. The vast majority in Democrats and Republicans. Why can't we vote on pension reform? What's holding it up? Same thing on local control. People have said, well, that's radical, extreme, it might hurt unions. Let the people in each community, local voters, control the costs in their local government. Democrats support that. Republicans support that. Why can't we allow that? And for those who want to keep the status quo, they can. I'm not saying they have to take away or change the status quo in Illinois. I want the communities that need to change the status quo in their community, allow them to do it. These are not radical ideas, they're not extreme, and they're not partisan ideas, they're bipartisan. I want to remind everybody, as we go forward, Democrats support the reforms that we're advocating. These are not Republican reforms, they're supported by members of both parties. Thanks very much, everybody.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.